Okay, my name is Jack Bohr. I was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, 19th of April, 1921. Graduated from Penn High School in 1939. Happened to be in a town called Newcastle, Pennsylvania, when World War II broke out. The next day, my buddy and I are at the courthouse volunteering to give our services, whatever they needed to do. I wound up in Fort Meade, Maryland, spent a week there, and they sent me to Wichita Falls, Texas. I had enlisted in the U.S. Army Air Corps at that time. Went to airplane and engine mechanic school, left there, went to San Diego, B-24 Specialist School, and wound up at Barksdale Air Force Base on B-26s, the old Martin Marauder. Flying those as an engineer gunner for a while, I decided to go to flying school. I took my flying in Texas, never got out of Texas. When I graduated from flying school at Ellington Field, Houston, Texas, they sent me to B-26 school at Del Rio, Texas. From then I was sent back to Barksdale in Shreveport, Louisiana to the same outfit I had left when I went into flying school. After a while down there in B-26 training, I got called out one day with a bunch of other fellows, sent to Syracuse, New York, where then General of the Air Force, the Army Air Corps at the time, Hap Arnold, came to Syracuse and activated the 4th Combat Cargo Group. So from good airplanes, B-26s, into what I considered bad airplanes, C-47s, we started training as the 4th Combat Cargo Group. After 3 months, we were transferred to Louisville, Kentucky, and checked out in C-46s. After some training down there, they gave us orders to go to Fort Wayne, Indiana, where we picked up brand new C-46s. My original aircraft had 7 hours total flying time. We went to Morrison Field, West Palm Beach, Florida. From there, after about a week, to receive mosquito nets and winter gear. We didn't know where we were going, but we took off, went to Puerto Rico, on down through South America, Belém and Natal. Left Natal for the Ascension Islands. Left the Ascension Islands to Accra in the British West Gold Coast in those days. From then across Africa into Yemen, and from there into Karachi, India, which is now Pakistan, across to a little town called Sylhet, India, about an hour's flight or something like that north of Calcutta. We started flying out of Sylhet. Our first mission was out of Lido, carrying asphalt to Missionah, Burma to repair the runways that the Japs had bombed. After that, we went to Argatella. From then on into Chittagong, which is on the Bay of Bengal. We flew supplies out of Chittagong to the British 14th Army on their march to Rangoon. When Rangoon fell in the middle of 45, we were transferred to Missionah, Burma, where we started flying the hump. For the rest of the war, we flew the hump into China at various bases, Luliang, Kunming, and other places. After that, we went back. We were stationed in Missionah. We flew more hours after the war was officially over than any month we had before the war ended. Then they decided Washington got into the act eventually and decided they didn't need us anymore. So they sent me to Shabwa. From there I got a C-54 and went into Karachi. Hung around for 30 days then until they decided to send us home by ship. I went on by the U.S. General Callan, a 22-day sojourn up through the Arabian Sea, up through the Suez, across the Mediterranean, and across the Atlantic. Landed in Pier 91, New York, the day after Thanksgiving, 1945. So for us guys, we had 2 Thanksgiving dinners. They gave us one on board the ship and one at New Rochelle, New York when we got there. After that, they said, where do you want to go? And we went home. They gave us the alternative of coming back after 30 days to tell them what our desires were when we got there. They had the same tech sergeant sitting at the same desk saying, have you made up your mind? We said, yes, we decided to stay in. He said, good, go on home for another 30 days or until we call you. We went home, this guy and I, lasted another 30 days, went back, the same tech sergeant sitting at the same desk, said, have you made up your mind? We said, yeah, we decided to stay in. He said, good, go on home for another 30 days. We went home and then eventually returned. Sent us to, I can't think of the town now, in North Carolina, where we spent a week. Then they sent us to Ellington Field, Houston, where I had originally graduated in the first place. Spent some time down there when they decided to send me across Texas to Amarillo by way of Chicago, which was a long trip. Spent some time down there when they decided to close the base. They gave me orders to go on home. So September of '46, I went back to Pittsburgh. Got separated at Fort Meade, Maryland again. Went home. 2 years later, I was back in the service. From then on, I just stayed in and retired in August the 1st, 1965. After that, I was out of the service except being a retiree from whatever I decided to do. I went to work for the state of Florida, the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. Stayed there 12 years until I decided to quit again. As of now, I am fully retired and retarded. Which it says in going into Leesburg, Florida, retire here, but they wanted you to buy 4 tires, which I did not do. I eventually moved to Cape Canaveral, stayed up there 15 years until I moved down here to Palm Bay, where I now reside. From, let's see, I moved down here in 2001. My wife passed away in 2002. And I am still a resident of Palm Bay, Florida. Became a volunteer at the Air Force Space and Missile Museum, where we conducted tours from Kennedy Space Center. It was called Before and After. We were the before, Cape Canaveral Air Force Station. The after was Kennedy Space Center with the rockets and whatnot. I spent 24 years there as a volunteer, until such time as I retired last year, I think it was. So I am no longer connected other than receiving a monthly letter telling me what's happening. So I'm down here now and on a daily basis, my pastime is going to the gym 3 days a week, going to the Moose Lodge whenever, going to Rooney's for chow, going home and enjoying the finer things of life. End of transmission.
Cut. Okay, sir.
Okay, I enlisted in the U.S. Army Air Corps at Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, the day after Pearl Harbor. When the Japs attacked Pearl Harbor, I was in a little town called Newcastle, Pennsylvania. My buddy and I went home that evening and went down to the courthouse where the recruiting office was the next day. In those days, the line extended better than 6 blocks down the street for people willing to enlist back in 1942. Like I said earlier, I went to Fort Meade, Maryland, and then on to Texas. Where did I leave off there, I wonder? I eventually wound up, I told you, graduating from flying school, Ellington Field, Texas. B-26 school. Then they sent me to Syracuse, New York. Like you said, some of this is repetitive. General Hap Arnold, in charge of the Army Air Corps in those days, came to Syracuse and we activated the 4th Combat Cargo Group. I wound up in the 13th Combat Cargo Squadron. We departed later on from training in Syracuse on into Louisville, Kentucky. Went to Fort Wayne, Indiana, picked up new C-46s. Went to West Palm Beach, Florida, and from them on overseas. Down through Puerto Rico, South America, departed Natal to the Ascension Island. Went to Accra in the Gold Coast. Across Africa through Khartoum, went to Yemen. From there into Karachi, which was then India. On across to a little town called Sylhet, India, where we started flying. My first job was carrying asphalt out of Lido into Missionah, Burma, to repair the runways. From then on, we flew supplies to the British 14th Army until they recaptured Rangoon. After Rangoon was captured, we were transferred to Missionah, Burma, where we proceeded to fly the hump, carrying all kinds of supplies, troops, etc., into Kunming, Luliang, and other places in China until the war was over. But we flew more hours in the month of September after the war was officially, supposedly over, than we did during July and August and whatnot of the year. After that, we went back to Missionah. We were declared homeward bound, went to Shabwa, from Shabwa to Karachi, India, where we boarded the U.S. General Callan for a nice long ride of 22 days to Pier 191 in New York. Landed there the day after Thanksgiving, 1945. Went home from there. They gave us 30 days leave, told us to come back. We went back and they said, what do you want to do? Decided we'd stay in the service. They said, good, go on back home for another 30 days. We'll send you your orders. So we got orders finally. It says go to Greensboro, North Carolina. Kept us there a week, then sent us back to Ellington Field, Houston, Texas. We stayed there a little bit of time. I can't recall how long, whether they decided to transfer us again. And we went to Amarillo, Texas, clear across Texas. We got there when they decided, what are we doing there? They're going to close the base. So they closed it, picked up our orders in the mailbox one day that said, you will report to Fort Meade, Maryland for separation from the service. So that's where we went. Got orders, get out of the service and go home. 2 years later, I'm back in the service again. Wound up at Langley Field, Virginia. Left there and went to the Aleutian Islands in Alaska. Came back from there to Scottsfield, Illinois. From there to Greater Pittsburgh, my hometown. From there to Rome, New York. From Rome, New York, they sent me to Oklahoma City for air traffic control school. So I went to what was then the CAA, took the air traffic controllers course. And after that, they sent me to New Hampshire, Grenier Field, for 30 days as acting site commander. Got orders from there to go to Tokyo, where I worked Tokyo radar for a year, which was air traffic control. We handled all traffic going into and out of Japan in those days. The original air traffic control over there. After my tour there, I wound back in the States, and they sent me to Selma, Alabama, Craig Air Force Base, where I was Flight Facilities Officer in charge of RAPCON, GCA, Control Tower, everything that came under flight facilities. Until they decided to move me again, I wound up in Washington State in Air Defense Command. From there, I wound up in Rabat, Morocco, working in the 25th there, not the 25th, in the, I forget the division number over there in Rabat, the capital of Morocco. Came home from there to Valdosta, Georgia, where I was a radar operator, training Brazilian pilots on 86s and the in their interception, how to intercept aircraft. From there, I wound up at Fort Lee, Virginia, in the Washington Air Defense Sector, the big blockhouse, as we called it, which controlled all traffic and everything else, radar and otherwise, into the Washington, D.C. area. Left there and went back to Alaska for the second time at Murphy Dome, Alaska, 44 miles up the road out of Fairbanks. Spent a year up there and got a reassignment to Duluth, Minnesota. From Duluth, Minnesota, I retired from the Air Force and eventually made my way to Leesburg, Florida. From then to Cape Canaveral, Florida. From there to Palm Bay, Florida, where I now reside. I retired from the Air Force in 1965. End of story.
Cut.
Away. Started talking to about a couple hundred people. He stopped right in the middle of it. He looked around, he says, "Folks, I can tell you what I did 50 years ago. Right now, I can't tell you what I had for dinner last night."
A lot of us, the long-term memory is okay.
That's correct.
The short-term memory.
That's what he was trying to tell us. He lost his sense of where he was going.
That's my excuse for my wife. I can't remember.
Well, that's mine. I have a very definite remember and don't remember it. I went into service at the age of 20, January the 6th, 1942. My birthday was April. That's when I became 21. I was in San Diego, California.
That's where I'm from.
Are you? Yeah. In the Presidio, not the, what's the name of that big ballroom out there? They used to have Horace Knight and his band and all that big stuff in San Diego.
Hotel Del Coronado?
No, that wasn't Coronado.
My grandmother was Rosie the Riveter.
Rosie the Riveter.
She was putting planes together out there.
The funniest thing that I can recall that happened to me in San Diego, as you know, was a sailor town. Now, I was Army Air Corps, private, no stripes, slick sleeve, in a khaki uniform. And I was walking up the street one day in a residential area. I wish I could remember where it was, when some little old lady sitting on a porch yelled at me. So I turned around, she says, "You come here, young man." And I started up her walk, and she came to meet me. She says, "I've lived here a long time, and all I see is white suits. I've never seen anybody dressed like you are. Just what are you?" I says, "I am Army Air Corps, ma'am." She said, "Never heard of them."
She will.
She was correct. There weren't too many of us. I was going to B-24 Specialist School at Lindbergh Field.
How was the mood in the country right after Pearl Harbor?
Right then, everybody was gung-ho at that particular time. It faded. It was held through the war, as far as I'm concerned. I never saw too many argue against it. Unlike what came later in the Vietnam area, where everybody was against it. It seemed like that way anyhow. You were frowned on for even being there. Although I never got to Vietnam to set foot on the ground. I was on orders to go, and they were canceled. We never went. We never knew why. But I was at Johnson Air Base, Japan at the time, so who could you ask? They wouldn't tell you anyhow.
Did you have any very scary experiences, things that really scared you?
Taking off at Chittagong, India one day was a belly buster, you might call it. It tightened your innards when you took off with a full load of 10,060 pounds of 130 octane gasoline with 1,400 gallons in the tank. You lose the right engine as you broke ground and the right gear wouldn't retract. We got to 200 feet and went out over the Bay of Bengal, firewalled everything we could think of, got to 200 feet and made a long turn and came back and landed. That was the closest time I ever thought I was going to meet my maker. But we made it. And as we crossed the end of the runway, by chance, our CO was sitting in number 1 takeoff. And all he said, "That's my boys." But we landed safely.
Do you remember one of the funniest things that may have happened to you
Funniest?
during the war?
Other than carrying troops across the hump and the poor Chinese, you just load them onto the airplane. We had 64 people one time. But the poor Chinese troops would open the door in the old C-46. It opened from the inside, a smaller door, and you could open it. And they would stand there like this in the doorway, stick their head out to get some of the breeze, and the guy behind them would kick him in a fanny. And all you'd hear is a loud yell, and he's gone. You'd take off with 64, you'd land with 63 or whatever. Never landed with the amount you took off with. That was their humor. That I remember. We also found out one time they armed the Chinese with Thompson subs so that they could fight. So we load them in the aircraft, carry them back to China so they could fight the Japs. But if the weather got them sick, they had the crew lined up underneath the wing. They were going to shoot them. They blamed the crew for making them sick. So they decided to take their weapons off them, put the weapons in the belly, take them across the hump, dump them out at Kunming or Luliang or wherever. Then we would see that their weapons were returned after we got the devil out of there. But that's the way they operated in those days. One of my last flights into Kunming was when I first heard of the communists. They picked us up at the aircraft in a Jeep. The Jeep had a .30 caliber on the hood, 2 guards holding rifles and everything else. Rat race us into operations. The guy behind the desk, some captain, gave you a piece of paper. He said, "Sign your name here. I'll fill it out later. Get out of here. We're surrounded by communists." That's what happened the last time I was ever in Kunming. Back to Mishinau, Burma. I don't know what happened after that. I went home. But that's the way things were after the war. The first month after the war. And everybody knows what happened then. The communists took over. That's about all I can remember of that over there. Other than a few flights out of Burma and on the hump where you lost an engine. And crew chief always used to tell you the next day, "I found it. It's hanging out on the right wing," or wherever. But we lost a couple. I had a prop one time coming out of Burma that feathered itself, and there wasn't anything I could do to prevent it. So when we landed, I landed at Chittagong that day, prop was just standing right in the wind. Had feathered itself, all on account of a little piece of wire about that long on top of we had Curtis Electric props in those days before we got to Hamilton Hydromatics. But little things like that, when all your instruments would go out, the whole entire electrical system, and all you had in that big thing was needle ball and airspeed. The only thing that I could thank the good Lord for it was a clear day. I would not want instruments in that C-46 with needle ball and airspeed. Not hunting a runway, but it never turned out that way. Everything turned out good. I'm here. That's it. Took off one day in southern Burma. It had rained. And the rains in Burma, when you get 300 inches in about 4 months, was kind of muddy. The water was halfway up the wheel. You could hear it splatter when you fire. We had to firewall the baby. And through the water, and the minute you got up, sucked the gear up, and hope you got those P and WR 2800s did not spit. But that was the best engine built, so. It worked. We lost a bird down there one day. It couldn't get out in time, as I understand it. Last time I saw it, all you could see was the wings and the top of the fuselage. It had sunk into the mud. So they took a Sherman tank in there, as I was told, to try to get it out of the mud, and the only thing they succeeded in doing was pulling the tail off the thing. So they decided that to leave the thing there. Last time anybody saw it, it was down in the mud. South Burma. Maybe it's still there, I don't know. The worst thing, in my mind, the worst thing that I ever saw in my life was we were carrying supplies to the British 14th Army, as I mentioned earlier. I flew into one strip and we looked at it and we said, looks like bodies. Turned out to be dead Japs, piled up. The British used bulldozers to pile up the dead Japs. Then they dug a great big trench, bulldozed them in to bury them. At least they buried them, not sitting out in that 120-degree heat. But the stench then was enough that you didn't want to hang around. It was worse than the burning vats when I went to see them in Calcutta, where they stacked the dead people 4, 5, and 6 high, put one body down, put wood, whatever, stack some more, stack them up 4, 5, 6 deep, and then start the fire, because nobody got buried in India. You were taking up rice paddy space. Unmarried virgins and kids up to the age of 21 were thrown in the Ganges River. That's where they were buried. The man-eating crocodiles took care of them. The others were put into what we called the burning vats, they called them. You can still smell it if you think about it. It's worse than the streets of Calcutta. And they're bad. When you walk down there at night, no street lights during the war, you'd step on something, human being. Some of them never slept under a building, under a roof. They slept on the sidewalks. The average age in those days was 42 in Calcutta. So we were told. And we believed it, because you could look at them. Poor guys had nowhere to go. Naked women standing on the sidewalk, on the street corner, holding a little naked baby in one arm and saying, Bakshish Sahib. Bakshish was gift, you know. Bakshish Sahib, for whatever, Anna, rupee, whatever you could, if you gave her anything. Never forget that. Shows you how the other half lives. Anybody that doesn't think we have it good doesn't deserve to be here. So if you gripe when you're overseas, just go home. Because when you get home, in our estimation, we're better than any other place in the world. Because we used to tell guys that would gripe because they got sent to North Dakota or somewhere they didn't want to go to. We said, well, then you just stay over here. We'll go 48 states in those times. We'll take any one of them, just so we're going boom, go home. If you don't want to go, stay here. We don't care. But you know, some people gripe about their assignments. I griped. But a town is what you make it, be it a city or a little burg. If you stay on base and hate everything, you're never going to get anywhere. You'll be unhappy until you die. You might as well die young. You're no help to anybody. Go downtown and mix among them. See how the other half lives. You feel better. I was told in a little town in Long Beach, Washington, I was assigned to a radar site in Nacelle, Washington. I went downtown. I went around when I got my assignment to Morocco. I was telling several people in the local tavern, the Elks Club, and the mayor ran a drugstore. So I went in to say goodbye to him. And the only thing he said to me is, I'm glad you're leaving, Jack. I said, I just came in here to say goodbye. I'm leaving, yes, but that's not Why do you say that to me? He said, because election's next week. If you ran, I'd lose my job. That's true. Tickled the hell out of me. But a town is what you make it. You want to stay home, feel sorry for yourself? Go ahead. You're the only one that's sorry. Everybody else doesn't care. That's the way I look at it. And grass is not always greener on the other side of the street. It's what you make it. End of transmission. Well, I would say that we hope that we would never have another one. But if we had, and if they wanted to get ahead, go to school and learn all you can. Too many people in other countries don't have that privilege. And education is what's going to put this nation ahead, or they're going to fall behind. Simple as that. I would tell any kid, don't go out and get a job just because you hate school. Stay in school. It'll better yourself later. If you want to get ahead, you better get an education. And today, it's out there. Take advantage of it. Didn't always have that in the old days. It's about my best advice, I think. If I had it to do over again, I'd go to college, which I had the opportunity and did not do. You don't regret it then, you regret it later. That was one thing that I would have done. That's what I told my son to do. He graduated, thank God. Didn't go where I wanted him to, but that's beside the point. He's a college grad. And that's about it, Nat.
Okay.
Out.
Righto.
I never did like the terminology Roger and out. Just say out. Our aircraft was triple nickel 8-ball, 5558. And all over, the tower called us that, and we had everybody calling it triple nickel 8-ball. Because it sounded better than 5558. So we had the tower call us that all the time.
Did you have a call sign?
Rarely did we ever use one. We just used our numbers. No, I can't recall ever using a call sign. We were just flying supplies. We weren't like bombers, stuff like that. We didn't need the call sign stuff. They were broken into flights and segments and whatnot. We weren't. You got your manifest, you look to see where you were going and take the bloody stuff and go. If you could taxi.
Did you have any unusual cargo?
Yes. I've carried everything from Evinrude motorboat engines, a plane load of those babies, to steel. You never wanted to fly an airplane that the British loaded for you. Got into one day at Chittagong and we couldn't even taxi. We had 72 inches and the bird wouldn't move. We had a cargo about that deep. We got out and looked. Said, give me the bloody manifest again. We looked. The C-46 would take, it was 10,000 pounds, but you could take 12,000 plus. The cargo we had was over 22,000 pounds, loaded by the British, who stood there and said, you've got lots more room. They didn't consider the weight, so you had to watch. The first load of engines I took, we used the Royal Indian Army drove the trucks, unloaded the aircraft. we used to carry Argentine beef to the British troops, the British 14th Army. And they had the Hindus and the other type of religions over there that meat was not one of their primary concerns. They would not touch it. We had Argentine beef. We said, how in the hell are we going to get it out of the aircraft? They wouldn't touch it, so they took our tie-down rods and hit them like this and dragged them to the door and kicked them into the back end of the truck. They would not put their hands on meat. That's why you see the sacred cows down in Calcutta. They don't touch them. They starve to death, but they won't touch them. They did not know how to drive. The British let them drive. They would back up to the door of your aircraft, and by the time they put the brake on, you had holes in the side of your aircraft. They'd ram into it, unless you screamed bloody murder about 3 feet before you got there. If you had the aircraft on the ramp with the tail end down, and they're coming down in a British lorry, they'd run right into it. They thought it was a rise in the road. A lot of funny things happened over there. One pilot jumped in an airplane one day that was parked, and they used to cannibalize it. They use it for spare parts. He got into it. Crew chief got into it one day, and here's 2 Indians in there from the Royal Indian Army, frolicking together. He kicked them. True story, he kicked them both out of the bloody aircraft, and he said if he ever saw them again, he'd kill them. I don't know if he ever saw them again. I don't think they ever used that aircraft to get together again. They would trade you cigarettes. They loved American cigarettes. And our houseboy, I'll never forget, he came up to my buddy and I wanted to trade. I was smoking Chesterfields. He wanted an American cigarette. He'd give me one of his. So we said, okay, we'll swap you. We didn't really care for his. So we lit it, started smoking. He said, no, you don't do it that way. You put the thing here somehow like this, and with the cigarette sticking up this way, you go. It turned out to be hayhish. About 15, 20 minutes of that, sucking on that cigarette, we sat down by a tree and said, what in God's name is in this bloody thing? It's a good thing we don't have to fly. So we never smoked his cigarettes anymore. If he wanted a cigarette, we'd give him one. It was better to quit. Funny. They were the slickest people. Well, they were destitute, I guess. I had a captain in my tent that slept with his 45 under his pillow. He got up that one morning, the 45 was gone. They could tip through your old bamboo shack. You'd never hear them. They'd, under the pillow, take his gun and away they're gone. One night they stole my pants. Old khaki pants, but they had my wallet and my handkerchief and comb and loose change and stuff like that, annas and whatnot, because we were paid in Indian money, Burmese money and whatnot. And the only thing, I found my pants on a little path the next day, out into the woods, jungle, whatever you want to call it. The only thing in my pants was a miniature 6-shooter that had been given to me by a girl in Shreveport, Louisiana. And it would shoot caps, like the old cap pistol. It was only about that big, but you could pull that thing up and put a cap in there and go, and it went pop. I carried that thing for years and years, and when I got those pants back, when I found the pants, the only thing left in my pants was that little pistol. He missed that. I don't know whatever happened to it. It's been too long ago. I don't know what happened to it. I wish I had it, but I don't know what happened to it. But you had to watch those people. They were just like when I was in Morocco. Steal from each other, they cut your wrist off, cut your hand off. steal from Americans, that was okay. Because Americans had it, you didn't. I don't know if you've been to Morocco or those places, but if you see a guy coming on with no hand, I was just reading about it the other day, that the penalty for stealing was chop it off. Thank God we're not that way. We'd have a lot of people with no hands.
But nobody do work.
That's correct. But I'm not saying they were all bad, because they weren't. There were some real nice people over there, if you got to know them. I met a couple in Calcutta. She was an English girl from London. He was an Indian engineer, civil engineer. Never forget, real nice people. I've been in their house. We've been out and had drinks together in the places in Calcutta. Real nice folks. His name was Roy, R-O-Y. I thought they pronounced it Roy. Then I come back here and find out there's a guy by the same name who was playing hockey in Canada, and they call that Waugh. And I look at it printed, and it's R-O-Y. How he gets Waugh out of that, I'll never know. But the one in Calcutta, he called himself Roy, R-O-Y. She was a good-looking English babe. Never saw her in English clothes. She always had a sari. She fit in with the local populace. The humorous, walked down the main drag in Calcutta. It was hard to find a bathroom. So these old boys walking down the street with their sheets on, as we called it, they would squat up against the building, the side of the building, aim it there, and it would run down. And the funniest thing you ever saw was prim English ladies coming down the sidewalk, stepping over the stream of urine going into the street. Didn't bother them a bit. They just step over it and keep on going to the open market. Flies as big as, and the meat's hanging down from the ceiling, and everything, fruit, vegetables, everything out in the open. We were told not to participate. If you took anything, make sure you cooked it. Don't eat it raw. Same thing with Tokyo. Their fertilizer was human waste, not the kind you buy over here. Which shows you how the other half lives. Other than that, they're pretty nice people overall. I had one friend of mine that was on the Bataan Death March. He was 18 years old, came from Massachusetts. Young enough at the time that it didn't bother him that much, although he didn't like what he was doing. But they sent him to Japan. They sent some of them that had been on the Bataan Death March to Japan to see how they would fit in with the Japanese after the war and everything was over. One guy, they sent him and took him right out in the first week. He was just so violent. He hated them with a passion. So they back to the States. The other guys, they would see how they would fit in with the local populace, because most of them didn't have anything to do with it any more than we did. But he got along all right, apparently. As I was in Karachi, and I was met at the airplane, I was in Morocco, and I was sent to Karachi as an Air Force representative for a SEATO nation air defense exercise. SEATO was Southeast Asia Treaty Organization. And we had a guy go to Tehran, one to Ankara, Turkey, and they sent me to Karachi, Pakistan. I was met at the airport by a colonel with a staff car. He was on what we called the MAG assignment, military Air Advisory Group, which they used to have. I don't even know if they have them anymore. And on the way in to downtown Karachi, I was staying at the Karachi Hotel, where they put me up, right next to a room full of hostesses. They had 6 or 8 in there, and I thought I was in heaven. No, but anyhow, driving into town, we went through, I guess you could call it a shanty town. You never saw anything like in your life. Made out of cardboard, sheets of tin, I guess it would be. Just you could call it a tent city, except there weren't any tents there. Makeshift shacks. Never saw so many people in my life. And I said to the colonel, what is that? And he says, the poor folks. That's where they live. That's all they have. And you could see how the other half lived. That was on the outskirts of Karachi. I can still see that. Yet there's some nice things over there. Best part of India that I ever saw was Taj Mahal. My crew and I had a picture taken in front of it. I've got it somewhere. They're all gone but me. I didn't tell. We were stationed in Karachi, in Chittagong. Took off one day, and you won't believe it, but we got dive bombed by a vulture who went into the right wing, into the gas tank. We look out, and all you can see is his legs sticking out of the bloody gas tank. Naturally, we had to land, and we went back in, parked. The old C-46 had windows you could pull this way and crawl through them and get out on the wing. Well, we went out in the wing and grabbed him by his legs, and we couldn't budge that bloody thing. So we got out, and they got what they used to call cleat tracks. I don't know if you've ever heard of a cleat track or not. It was built like a tank with treads. They weren't that big, but we tied cable about that big around onto that vulture's legs, and that thing was supposed to tow it out of our gas tank. And it, up like this. That's how tight that damn bird was down into our gas tank. He finally got him out, but it left a big hole. So they gave us orders, and Ops called us in, and they gave us orders to go, and we read the orders, and it said, you will go proceed to Argatella. You will proceed to Calcutta. You will proceed to Agra, India, and any place necessary to either repair the wing or replace the wing. So we read that thing, went into Ops and got Ed Hubka was his name, he was Ops officer, and we said, we just come in to say goodbye. Why? Well, we're taking off to get our wing fixed. And we said, we want you to read these orders again. And any other place necessary. We said, we'll give you an RON from Miami. He said, if you guys leave the theater, you're dead ducks. We knew we couldn't go anywhere, but we did. We had to we wound up in Agra. And wasn't a wing to fit a C-46D in the whole CBI theater. So they sent us to Agra to a sheet metal shop. And they had to replace about half the top wing in order to fill up that hole where that big bird dive bombed us. But they did a good job. We spent a week in the old Agra fort, in the Taj Mahal, going by the mess hall at night after the baker was finished with his pies. He had them sitting in the window sills cooling off, and we'd grab a nice apple one and run like hell, you know. All you could hear was rah, 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 people chasing us, and we'd go like the bloody devil. decided one night to steal the colonel's Jeep. Came out of the club. There was a nice looking Jeep sitting there. We didn't know it belonged to a colonel. Got in that thing. That colonel had a evil mind. He didn't trust anybody. We put that thing in low gear and hit the gas and almost broke our bloody necks. He had it chained so nobody could steal it. We saw what an untrusting soul he is. Just little tidbits. That took place while we were not flying. I remember one time when I was in Missional, the engineers had a nice club up the road. Our club was just a bamboo shack. You might have had a couple of bottles of booze behind there and had no ice. Ice wouldn't last 5 minutes in that heat. But the engineers up the road, mainly an all-colored outfit, but they had a nice club. So we got in the old man's Jeep and everything and went up there one evening just to check it out. And lo and behold, they were ground pounders and we were flyboys. The two didn't really mix. The last thing I remember coming out of that club was the colonel behind me saying, "Move it, Jack, by God, they're coming after me." I'm going through the window and he's right. Jump in that Jeep and haul ass, get out of there, boy. Never went back. Just little diversions. Other than that, it was a quiet. I'll never forget that. We had two guys by the name of Shelton. Both came from Texas. One was 6 foot plus something. We called him Big Shelton, and the other was Little Shelton. He was about 5'7" maybe, but the other guy was, they'd stand together, they look like this. Old Shelton used to come in from flying, he hated the British with a passion. And we were flying supplies of the British 14th Army. Had to fly 3 missions a day. They'd get you up at 3 o'clock in the morning for a 5 o'clock takeoff. And if it took you to midnight for your 3 flights, you got up at 3 o'clock the next day anyhow. And he used to get PO'd because the British were supposed to unload you. But if you landed at tea time, God forbid that anything interfered with that war. Tea time was first priority. Even the damn Japs took a tea time out. But he got mad. He said, "Where in the hell are the people in charge?" And they said, "They're having a meeting over in that tent." To hear him tell about it. You know what Texans are anyhow. They're brown eyes because they're full of it up to here. He went through that tent and looked around and said, "Which one of you limeys is in charge?" Almost started World War III, 4, and 5 there. But he got unloaded. Often wondered what happened to him. We had a good outfit. Hated it in the beginning because I had come out of B-26s. Our group was formed from people thrown out of other outfits. That's the way we looked at it. People from B-26s that I was, B-25s, 17s, 24s, sent you to Syracuse, New York. In comes General Arnold and starts the 4th Combat Cargo Group. And we said, "What?" Said, "Your airplanes will come." "What kind of airplanes?" "C-47s. Well, that was enough. We wanted to kill everybody in sight. So we go to the club and whoo-hoo, we're not flying them damn things. Needless to say, we had no choice. But people from all over the country, we formed that 4th Combat Cargo Group. Turned out to be a pretty damn good group afterward. Found out later the only reason we were activated was for the job we did in Burma. Our orders came from USAF, U.S. Army Air Corps in those days. not from the Air Corps itself, but from U.S. Army Air Corps headquarters. It was our orders over there. Nobody in that theater could tell us what to do. Even when we came home, we couldn't get orders out of Chongqing, Kunming, any of them. And then they had a combat cargo task force in Camilla, Burma. They couldn't help us because our orders came from Washington. And those people must have been down closing nightclubs or doing something. It took them forever and a day to do something. Haven't changed. But we eventually got home.
Jack, I'm going to cut here for a second.
Trying to think of whatever else happened to me. Like I said, other than losing a few engines with a smart-ass crew chief saying if you look out, it's still hanging on the wing. We started off Kunming, going back to Burma. We got maybe 16,000 or something out of Kunming, heading back over the hump. When we look at it, we said, my God, coming out of the right engine was nothing but 130 octane. Babe, we turned around immediately and went back into Kunming, but we were stupid. We did not feather the engine. We did not cut the engine. We landed and that old crew chief almost had a heart attack. Old line chief, master sergeant. All I can see him as we pulled up and stopped, he's going, cut that. We get out, the main fuel line had broken and there was nothing but raw gas coming out over that engine. He said, Lord knows why it didn't catch on fire. Said, who knows? Said, somebody was riding with you today, buddy. So we had to spend the night till they fixed the bloody thing. That's what I found out what a bottle of wine in Kunming, China cost you. A burlap sack full of their yen. About that big. They took all of it and gave us a bottle of wine about like that. Exchange. MPCs. You remember the old MPCs? Did you have them? Military payment certificate? In lieu of dollars, it was an MPC. And if you wanted to see people go berserk, wait until they changed the MPC. They were in Japan when I was at Johnson Air Base, outside the gate, the fence, with fists full of it, because the military would change it unknown to anybody else, because the market would be becoming flooded with counterfeit and every other bloody thing. So out of the clear blue sky, say on June the 1st, they change it all. And here are these guys outside the gate with bundles of it, trying to change it, give it back to you so you can give them the good stuff. You got caught doing that, you were in deep, deep trouble. We wouldn't give them a bloody dime. They just lost what they had, you know, when they changed the MPC. We didn't know it either. We just wake up some morning and find out our money was no good either, but we could trade it in, you know, at the finance office. Military operates in strange ways sometimes. They'll break it off into you if you don't look. We had a Jap major in a stretcher, wounded. We were supposed to take him to Calcutta. They wanted to interview him. We picked him up somewhere in South Burma. But the guy flying with me that day came from Murray, Kentucky. He did not like Japs. He pulled out his 45 because the old boy was, I say old boy, the Jap was laying there, wanted water. He was saying, water, in English, water. So old Jim went over his 45 and he had it aimed right at his head and he said, another GD word out of you and you're dead. And I, don't do it, Jim. You'll be in worse trouble than me. He'll be dead, but you might as well be. You'll be in hot water, boy, for the rest of your career. Ooh, you won't have a career. You're finished the minute you pull the trigger. He finally calmed down and crawled back up in the cockpit. Put his 45 away, and I said, don't ever want to see that again. But we carried them all the time. No matter where you went, you had your 45. You had one other gun in the aircraft. It was a Thompson sub, I guess, is the only way you could really describe it. And it was stowed away up there someplace. Because this jerk I was flying with one day, this captain from Macon, Georgia, he wanted to see how it worked. Next thing I know, powie. So we had another hole in the roof. I said, Perk, this thing leaks enough. Why build another hole so the water can come in, you know? Because we stole British mounted raincoats, I told you that. And Aussie caps, the kind that went up the side. Put them on when we were flying because that C-46 leaked. That was the best leaking aircraft I ever put. You had water coming in the roof and in the furnace down below the heater, put out a flame about like that. And 9 times out of 10 it didn't want to work. The higher you went, the worse it worked. But it was supposed to keep you warm. We would go in, get unloaded, take off. We didn't care what was there. We just wanted to get out of there. Because when you had to make 3 flights a day, we wanted the bloody British, as we called them, blokes, to get the lead out of their fanny and do something. And not have tea time when we landed. We didn't have tea. Funniest thing about tea, we were used to American Red Cross girls, you know, or USO or whatever. Go in and get a cup of coffee. Well, we got into Burma one time on one of these dirt strips and we saw a tent. We said, what's that? Oh, that's the English USO girls. Oh, good, we'll go get something cold to drink. Well, that was the biggest fallacy that we could have thought of. Went in over there and said, what do you have cold to drink? She says, if you didn't bring anything, we don't have anything. I said, where do you think we're going to have cold stuff here at 120 degrees out there? So what do you have? I'll give you a cup of hot tea. You'll do what? She said, you drink a cup of hot tea and 15 minutes later you'll feel 100% better. It brings your temperature up to match the outside. Drink a cup of that hot tea, man, you felt better 15 minutes later on. Next day we go back and run up and say, hey, you got some more tea? We learned to like it. Good Lord. Nice girls out in the jungles, serving their country, doing whatever is necessary. You know, when we flew in Burma, the British would forge over what they called the battle line. They might go 100, 150, 200 lines, just push a wedge through and take a little air base. Because I was in Calcutta one day and we were getting briefed in this room by this major who wanted to know where we were going. We looked at the map and said, we're going here. Oh, you can't go there. The line is up here. Well, that's tough. Where we're going, can't go there. Can't sign your clearance. We said, that's all right. We were there yesterday. You were what? We were there yesterday. We're in here to pick up different load of supplies now to take. Went into base ops. He wouldn't sign the damn clearance. I can't sign it for that place. We don't care. We were there yesterday. We're going again today. Left unsigned. Your paperwork. No, we don't give a hoot. But we'd fly, they'd push a wedge through and you'd fly over there, dump the stuff off, whatever you might be carrying that day. Take off, we go back to Chittagong or wherever we were going. They would be in a battle all night long trying to hold that stuff. The Japs sometime would come in and take every damn thing we flew in that day. We wouldn't know that until we went back in tomorrow, you know. Then if you had to pick something up in Calcutta, like I said, they wouldn't sign your damn clearance. We said, we don't care. You didn't sign it yesterday. We were there yesterday. You can't be, that's below the line. We don't care. We weren't ATC, we were combat cargo. You know what I mean by ATC? ATC, American Transport Command. But we used to call it ATC, Allergic to Combat. And General Arnold was the general in charge, and we call it Arnold's Trucking Concern. ATC guys didn't like it. They didn't like us at all. They flew with regulations. They claimed we were unregulated. To a degree, they were correct. We'd go anywhere. They weren't allowed to go anywhere. We never filled flight plans except we're going south. Goodbye, see you later. They had all the paperwork, you know. We'd fly. I quit flying into Mandalay, I don't know how long. And an ATC guy in a C-54 went in there one day with an engine out. We understand he had an engine out. And they gave him the DFC for landing at a wild base like Mandalay. We said, there's nothing in Mandalay. We were in Mandalay 6 months ago. The only Japs in Mandalay now are dead ones. But ATC made him a hero. Well, we kidded about that, you know. We said, hell, why don't you pick a base where you've never been before? Follow us into Rangoon. But the fortunes of war. Every day is different, whether you elect it or not. We had a guy, like I said, Shelton from Texas, got mad at the British, got half crocked at the club in Michigan one night and was rounding up recruits. We said, what do you want us to do, Shelton? I want all of us, when this thing's over, to check out in P-51s. What are we going to do in P-51s? We're going to England. What are we going to do in England? We're going to London. Then what we're going to do, he said, we're going to shoot the shit out of that town. He said, and that includes the little ones. If there's a kid in the street, shoot him. He's going to grow up to be a bastard like his old man. That's a true story. Oh, he was very adamant. I never had that type of relationship with the British. I used to swap them a bottle of scotch for a case of toddy. Of course, the scotch was called Highland Sandy. And if you tasted it, if the sand was in it, we'd get it from the engineers, and Lord knows what they did to it. So we started exchanging it. We thought with a case of toddy, which was a chocolate drink, we figured we were way ahead to get rid of that Highland Sandy. But the British troops down in Burma, they'd drink anything. Of course, they didn't have much to choose from, you know. They loved our beer. They'd give us, if they got Scotch whiskey or something, they'd give us anything they had to get a six-pack of beer. The more six-packs you'd give them, the more whiskey they'd give you. Until we found out it wasn't that good to drink. So we'd change it with the colored engineers who'd give you some toddy. It was the old swapperoo. They'd come through the 10 area saying, what you got? What do you got? That's where I saw Army guys sitting in our old bamboo shack that we called an officer's club. Sitting there crying like babies. Tears coming down their face. They were Army, tech sergeants, master sergeants, stuff like that. And a flying crew, you might say, doesn't have any rank. The pilot, the co-pilot, the crew chief, and the radio man were one and all. You called each other by their first names. You didn't wear rank. We never wore rank until the old man made us one day. He said, the damn British are complaining. They don't know who the hell they're talking to down there in Burma. He Said the crew chief is telling them to go to hell and they think they're talking to the pilot. So you had to start wearing rank after that. You put a little old gold bar or silver bar up here, get the smallest you could find, put it up here in your collar. So the British could look at it and see that you were made the tech sergeant and the staff sergeant, the engineers and radio man wear stripes so they could tell the difference. And I got called up to see the colonel one day because I was back talking a guy that had no shirt on. It was digging something down there and I blew dirt all over him. Because what are you going to do in Burma? There's nothing but dirt there. So when you pour that 2,000 horse engine to taxi, you were going to blow dirt on somebody if he's behind the aircraft. I got met by the colonel when I got back, and why did I blow dirt all over this English general? I said, I never saw an English general. Well, did this happen? I said, well, there was a couple guys down there doing something. I said, I guess I blew some damn dust on them. You had to taxi, you had to turn around. That was General so-and-so. Colonel, how could I tell? He had no shirt on, he was bare. Okay, I'll take care of it. This guy come up to me one day. I say, Yank, I want you to go to Calcutta. I said, you want me to do what? I'm not going to Calcutta. I'm going to Chittagong. Oh, I say, I need to go to Calcutta. I don't know, damn it, where you need to go to. I'm not taking you. I said, I don't have enough gas to get there in the first place. Plus, I'm having a little engine trouble. And this, by God, Limey claimed I'm a pilot and started up the stairs into the aircraft and said, I'll check out your engine and tell you whether you have trouble or not. I said, you'll do what? Manley, come here. He was my engineer. I said, you stand right here. That son of a bitch starts up the ladder, give it to him. And that's when I really blew dust. Not telling me where to go and what to do. Not even, it's another country. Who does he think he is? But that's what you ran into. Some were nice and some were belligerent as hell. He's going to tell me how to run my engine. He's crazy. Oh my God. We'll put him in the back of the airplane and throw him out just like on a drop mission. When we used to drop bundles in little circles down there, see if you could hit them. Never hit one. Got close, but never landed in the circle. That was for the troops in the jungle. When we found out that the C-46 was no good on drop missions, not worth a hoot in hell. It was too big. You couldn't slow it down enough. You'd stall out and kill yourselves, what you do. But the Goonie Bird was good at it. The old C-47, it was good at it. They finally told us to don't do it no more. We said, well, it's a good thing. We're not going to do it anymore. It's us in the seat, not you. Carry everything from Bailey bridges to booze. I had one flight into southern Burma. I had 10,000 pounds plus of Three Feathers whiskey. We had 4 birds loaded with whiskey. During the loading, they had a guy standing out front, British guy, counting them. So many cases. We'd sit under the wing after we landed and watch them. Count, recount, recount, count them again. There's always one case missing. Because C-46 had a trap door behind the pilot seat. Open that and slide it down into the belly. You had a side door here to take stuff out of the belly. And we had the AO, aerodrome officer, had a Jeep. He'd sit right there and you slide the case of booze into him and he'd haul ass. They'd take it up in the area and bury it. Because the British, untrusting. I mean, they didn't trust Americans. They were foolish. They should have trusted their allies. But when we heard that the British were coming for a search warrant, couldn't even find a Del Monte peach wrapper. everything was missing because they dig a hole someday and bury that booze. And when things quieted down and a rainy day when you didn't fly, we always had a little toddy for lunch. British never found anything. Never found. The dirty and no goods. They would wreck a good Jeep. When our Jeep didn't have a roof, didn't have reverse, this was operations Jeep. You had to get out and push it in the mud to turn it around because the reverse was no good. Here come this joker, British, with a damn new Jeep. Where'd he get it? He called it Lend-Lease. We called it Lend-Lost. He'd blow a tire or something, hit a tree, get out and leave the damn thing. Oh, I say, old boy, we'll get a new one tomorrow. Why, that made us want to kill him right there. They say nothing fair in love and war. They're correct. I don't know about love so much, but by God, that war, it was not fair. Bloody joker to leave a Jeep sitting there and then go get a new one, and we couldn't even get ours repaired. Oh, well, those were good old days as you look back on them. This one joker from Fitch was his name, never forget him. I think he came from Texas. He used to steal the old man's Jeep. And he'd get another guy that had a Jeep, and they'd play tag. He'd run into him with that Jeep and then firewall it the other way and go through ditches and every other thing. Just nothing better to do. You know what I'm talking about. He put it in a ditch one time and couldn't get it out. But the old man got him that time. So he fined his ass, I don't know, a couple, $300. Was going to take so much out of his pay every month to pay for the damn Jeep. Well, the war would have to last a while to pay all that money. Anyhow, the war ended, and the old man said, well, might as well give up the never going to collect now. I don't know if he ever got a dime out of him or not. We don't know. But he was fined. Do that stuff today, why, they put you under the bloody jail. We used to steal the old man's Jeep to go on little missions. He'd blow up. We used to go to mess hall, they'd say, steak for dinner. Everybody'd run, I mean, you run to the mess hall. The old man, he'd haul an ass. He'd get there, maybe you'd beat him by a step or two, but he's right there trying to be first to go in the door. You'd find out, but it was round steak, all right. We called them hot dogs. We had marmalade. You've heard of marmalade. He come in one morning for breakfast, looked at the table, picked up that jar of marmalade and turned around and threw it right through the window. Of course, there was no glass there. It was bamboo shanks. Then he went around to the table and he wanted $5 over each one of us. $5 was $5, you know. He's a colonel. Then he got a crew and he said, you're not flying today, you're off? Well, you're flying. You're going to Calcutta. And I want you to buy strawberry preserves, blueberry preserves, plum, all kinds of good stuff. And he said, if you come back here with one jar of marmalade, you're a court-martial. He said, you come back with anything and everything. He liked jelly. But he had just seen too much marmalade. And he said, you're a court-martial, but you come back with one jar of it. And the last jar I saw on the table, like I said, he threw through a window, even though there wasn't any window there. You don't build windows in the bamboo shacks. Like our so-called club. We had a bar, and if we could barter and somehow, we had a whiskey allotment, but it only came once a month. You got one case of beer if you were lucky, and maybe a jug of booze, depending on what it was. You never knew what it was. I used to get mine from the flight surgeon. He'd get quart bottles of old Guggenheimer, old Overholtz, stuff like that. Went on a rest leave to Darjeeling, India, and he gave me and my buddy one full quart of what he called medicinal whiskey to take with us on our rest leave up to Darjeeling, where you could look out the window and see Mount Everest. That was well appreciated, believe me. We smoked, we got in cahoots with the Red Cross girl, and she gave us a carton of cigarettes. We loved her to death. Chesterfields. I forget what we had to give her for those damn cigarettes. Jim gave her something, I forget what it was. But we went up out of Calcutta by train to Mount Everest. Mount Everest Hotel, Darjeeling, India. We would get out of the train, which it would go up. What do you call that type of day? Zigzag back and forth this way. You know what I mean? We'd get out and walk up and say to the engineer, "We're going to get there." "Yeah, we get there." We'll go back in the car again. You could walk faster than that rate train was going. But it was nice when we got there. The Mount Everest Hotel was run by an Armenian Jew who got into trouble with this British paratrooper. There were half a dozen of them up there. They had dropped on Rangoon when they took Rangoon. They were up there recuperating, I guess you could call it. But boy, did they recuperate. The one guy rented a horse to go ride one day, and he decided that the horse needed a scotch. So he come through the front door of the hotel, right across the lobby and everything else, right up to the bloody bar on that big white horse. He was crocked. He gets out, he gets a scotch, and he opens the horse's mouth. And then at the back door, and he'd knock on this one door, and this guy was in there sleeping off a hangover, and the door opened two ways, you know, the top part opened. Then you had to open the bottom part to get out. He opened that top part, and there's that guy sitting on that horse, and he goes, "Ah!" Slams the thing shut, and he wouldn't come out. We're in there in the evening saying, "I wonder where he is." So they go and beat on his door. He finally looked out and he says, "I'm not coming, I quit." He said, "How come you quit?" He said, "There was a knock on the door. I opened the door, and he said, there was a damn horse standing." They had to convince him it really was a horse, that this other guy was riding it. And the guy that ran the hotel was going bananas. Oh my God. Then the English guy, one of them, I don't know who did, set the damn drapes on fire. Everybody's sitting there going, "You smell anything?" Look over in the corner, here, these big drapes, fire coming up from the bottom, everybody running over. And the guy that run the hotel's going bananas. No wonder he didn't like the British. And some babe from England used to sit there and they'd sing, "Oh, there'll always be in England." And she'd say, "As long as there's USA." And they'd get mad at her. And she came from London. Cheerio, you know. Most of them turned out to be pretty nice guys. Some were a pain in the... I got along good with the paratroopers because they rode airplanes even though they jumped out. Did all right. I can still picture that. They had a Darjeeling tea company up there. So we went to tour, a couple of us guys went to tour the tea factory. And they would pack you up a nice package of Darjeeling tea that you can buy today. And I shipped it home to my mother. They packed it and did everything. You know, you just pay them and they did everything. I wrote my mother and said, "Did you get the package I sent you?" "Yep. Very good tea." But I made a mistake. They had miniature Taj Mahals. Unfortunately, they were carved out of limestone. Sandstone or limestone. I forget what kind of, like a soap. And when I asked her, "Did you get the model of the Taj Mahal I sent?" I said, "What did you get?" She said, "I had a box full of something that looked like sand out or soap. I don't know what it was. It had just gone to nothing." Of course, she didn't know what the Taj Mahal was anyhow, you know. I said, "Oh, well, I should have saved my money to buy that thing and have it packed and ship it to Pittsburgh." When I told her what it was, she said, "Oh, well." Nice model. It looked real nice when I bought the thing. She got the tea, though. That's the main thing. Bought a horse. Rented a horse one day. I'm going to learn to ride. Doesn't work out that way. Darjeeling Indian, never forget that horse. If I had a gun, I'd shoot it. Started out the path, half a dozen of us, you know, that damn thing up way up there somewhere. I either fell off or got knocked off. I think he knocked me off. And man, that was quite a ways to walk back. And when I got back to the stable, there's that damn horse standing there. Went back by himself. And I said, "That's the horse I had." And the guy said, "Don't worry about it. He knows where to go." I said, "Oh." And I had to walk. I paid to ride and I had to walk. Funny little stories. They had a drink up there on that Nepal border that they told you don't touch. I found out later. A GI drank one glass of it. He went out and he laid in a coma for 3 days. And they said, whatever he drank, don't do it. Well, none of us would touch that stuff up there. We were afraid of it, whatever it was. I don't know to this day. But he finally came to. And we offered him another one. "You want another one?" "No." That was pretty country up there. The top of the world, you might say, in the Himalayas up there. I liked it better looking down on it, though. There is a hearing doctor. It's called Ear to Ear down here on Malabar, Port Malabar, one of them down there. Well, I was in there and I looked on the wall and he's got a great big picture of the Himalayas, snow covered. I just looked up and I looked at him and I said, "That's a damn nice picture you got of the Himalayas." He looks at me and he says, "You know that's the Himalayas?" I said, "Yes, I do." I said, "I'm probably the only one in this chair that could ever tell you he looked down on it." "You looked down on it?" "Yep." "Well, what were you doing?" I said, "I was flying a hump. I looked down on the snow-capped Himalayas. Looks just like that in parts." He said, "Well, I'll be damned. You're the first one that's ever said that." I said, "You're probably the only one that ever looked down on it that's been in here." I said, "Oh, very well. It's still down there anytime you want to see it." Small world, that. Can't think of anything offhand now.
How's the food over there? Food pretty good?
GI food. We used to call it, let's see, what's that name? hydromatic potatoes, hydromatic meat, hydromatic whatever, and the world's worst coffee. The engineering officer got drunk one night at midnight, went to the mess hall in Burma and lined them all up, from the sergeant on down to the lowly KP, and wanted to know how in the hell you can make lukewarm coffee when it's 120 degrees temperature outside. The old man made him go back the next morning, line them up and apologize. Then we got a dissertation about how hard it was to make hot coffee when the temperature was 120. Don't ask me how they do it, but we thought it was lukewarm. We could smell them hydromatic eggs, hydraulic eggs, whatever you wanted to call them, dehydrated crap. We'd take a cup of coffee and try to force it down and get in that airplane and go to China. And walk in the mess hall there, and the aroma was, oh my God, fresh little banty eggs, you know, give you a half a dozen on a plate. Get a cup of coffee and a bowl of rice. Rice came with everything, didn't make a hoot. You learned to like rice or you didn't eat it. But we were hungry. We couldn't eat that garbage we had in our mess hall. We called it garbage. Just like when I went home, when I left home, I didn't like potatoes. I didn't like green beans. I didn't like none of that stuff my mother put on the plate. So I went to Texas. That's where they sent me. First year, after a year, they sent me, I got to leave, and I went home. I sat down, I got home for Christmas, that's right. You passed the brown, I took potatoes, I took green beans, I took carrots, I took beets. My mother just sat there and looked at me and said, "What happened?" You wouldn't eat any of that stuff. I said, when I got to Texas, I didn't eat it either. But I says, Mom, I'll tell you, after 2 weeks, you get awful hungry. So I decided to sample this, sample that. I said, pretty soon I was eating anything they put in the bloody tray. This is good. Which is about the truth to a lot of guys, except one from Missouri. He put ketchup on everything except chocolate ice cream. I don't care what it was. I said, George, why do you put ketchup on everything? He said, the only way you can eat it. I said, where'd you learn that at? He said, at home. I said, why at home? He said, my mother was a lousy cook. That's a true story. Came from Missouri. He was a Hilly William fan. You know what I'm talking about? Hillbilly music. We had one idiot in Texas. I love my milk cow, my milk cow. Love. We wanted to shoot him. This guy in Alaska, he played that junk until he drove you batty. So when he'd go to work, I'd cut the wires. He always managed to get it back on again before midnight. We listened to Armed Forces radio, and when he'd go to work, I'd cut him again. He had more splice wires than it. He threatened to kill me a couple times. But no. Just start getting some good music, George. But we cohabitated, as they said. Can't do much else in a Quonset hut. If willy-was would hit us, we called them willy-was, it storms off the Bering Sea. The wind would come at you about 110 knots horizontal. We'd be out there trying to go to the old GCA unit, ground controlled approach. We'd be bent over like this, trying to make your way into the wind. You know how stupid the wind is sometimes. It automatically just abruptly stops. You'd fall flat in your bloody face. You pick yourself up and start again, the wind's blowing again. I think it blew at least 35 miles an hour every day, and except when it got higher, when the willy-waws come in. Blowing sleet, snow, and rain until you went bananas. But Northwest had a terminal up there. This was at Shimei in the Aleutian Islands. They'd have a guy coming from Tokyo, and they'd call us and say, GCA, I was GCA operator at the time. You get this boy in, come on down, we got a case of beer for you. He'll get in. It's the only place out here he can go. 10,000 feet of solid concrete. One old boy didn't make it one day, though. He made 3 passes, then went to Cold Bay. We had a 35 to 40 knot crosswind. And he was coming down like this. He came over to the end of the runway and he says, not your fault. He says, I could see that white line out the window, but I couldn't keep it straight enough to land on the runway because of the wind, so he'd go to Cold Bay. But Northwest used to call, you get them down, boy, come on down, you got a case of beer. That's the first time I ever walked in the Northwest Lounge, and they'd have some hostesses that were going to RON during the night, you know. Every now and then before they went to Anchorage, they'd RON. They had a bar. The only time a guy with over 10,000 hours pilot time would serve me a drink because the pilots were tending the bar. I thought, this is pretty neat. Shimei, I hope I never see it again in my life. Worse than ADAC. You ever been in ADAC?
No, but I've been over Shimei.
Have you?
Yep. I know where it works at.
Right at it, practically the end of the chain. I think the only one left is A2 after Shimei. No, when they sent me up there the first time I went out to the chain, I spent about 5 months, 4.5, 5 months at ADAC. I was working GCA then, ground controlled approach. We had to stay there until the Navy got their GCA unit set up and flight tested and everything else. When they said it was finally okay, we thought we were going back to Anchorage. Those dirty no-goods. That way, Shimei. Another year. It was supposed to be a 1-year tour of the whole islands. It was a year and a half before I got back to the States. You can't trust the Air Force. Those people lie. Like the time when they were going to send me to Germany. Are you a volunteer or a non-volunteer? I said, if it's Germany, I volunteer. So the guy calls me up, this major, and said, it's Wiesbaden. Oh, yeah, I'll go. I'm a volunteer. Okay, your orders will come down. They come down and said, you report to Rabat, Morocco. I called up and said, you dirty no good, I'm not going to Rabat, Morocco. That's not our agreement. You said, I said I was a volunteer, but said Germany. He said, your headquarters is Wiesbaden, Germany. They're the ones that sent you to Morocco, so don't blame me. I didn't have a leg to stand on. Off to Morocco. Saw Casablanca. Looked all over for Humphrey Bogart, couldn't find him. Couldn't find Ingrid Bergman either. Turned out a pretty good tour though, actually. Not bad. Lived right across the street from a Russian embassy. I said, why can't they plant me beside it, at least beside the U.S. Embassy? I had to go a couple blocks down the road to find the U.S. Embassy. Every morning you get up and look out, there's that Russian flag hanging out there. Hotel Ducella, French hotel. Wasn't too bad a hotel. I bought a car. When I got over there, I found out that where I was going to work was 7 miles out the street, past the local airport. Rabbit Sail, we used to call it. It was Rabat Saleh, but we called it Rabbit Sail. Well, I lucked out there was a Red Cross girl going home. She had a little English Anglia. That's when I found out you better have wheels over here. You can't get to work, and there's no buses and all that stuff. So I met her at our little club one evening, and she said, yeah, I'm going home. I said, what are you going to do with your car? I'm going to sell it. Oh, goody, goody, goody. What do you want for it? $400. Little English Anglia. I said, $400? That thing doesn't look that big for $400, you know. But I found out it was a damn little good little car for $400. So I gave her $400 and I had it. Kept it the whole time I was over there. Shipped it back home to Charleston, South Carolina. They charged me $3.75 to ship that thing to Charleston. And that was so they could de-snail it. They put it up on a hoist and sprayed crap around it to get the snails off it, which I didn't know existed. Then after I got out, they sent me to Valdosta, Moody Field, and they said, your car's up here, come and get it. By the time I got up there was weeds growing up through the hood. They were that tall above the hood, coming up through any way they could force themselves through, you know. The guy picked me up in it wasn't a Jeep really. Like these things, golf carts type things they run around. He had extra batteries on it and all this stuff. He said, we'll have to start it. I get out there and open the door, turn the key on, pooh, run like a percolator. He stood there and he looked and he said, that's the only car I have ever seen start. After sitting here like that thing, with the weeds coming up through the hood and everything else. He said, man, what kind of car is it? I said, a little English Anglia. He said, it beats the Fords, Studebakers, and everything else they got out here. They won't start. That's why I got batteries. Mine started, drove right through the weeds. First thing I hit was a gas station. Got an oil change and a grease job. Purred like a percolator to Valdosta, Georgia. Kept that thing. Went to Minnesota. Gave it to my niece in Columbia, South Carolina to use. She was going to college. Then I came home and came through Columbia. I wanted my car back. She almost cried. I need it to go to school. You're going to have to get some more wheels. I'm driving this thing to Leesburg, Florida. Good little car. Gave it to my son. I don't know what he ever did with it. Eventually, I'd either quit running or I don't know what. But every time in Morocco, when I needed maintenance done, I couldn't understand anything. I'd take it to the local garage, but I didn't know what he was saying. So I got down the street to the embassy. Get the guy in the embassy and said, do me a favor and come with me. Okay, whatever. Take him to the garage. I said, he wants to know what's the matter with it, and I can't tell him because I don't know what he's saying. He doesn't know what I'm saying. So he was a translator. So I said, okay. Ask him when I can pick it up. 5 o'clock. Typical. Come and pick it up at 5. It's not ready, but it'll... That's how I got my car worked on over there. The embassy would have little get-togethers every now and then, you know. We lived in a hotel. They would invite us all. People from the embassy, we're Americans, so come on down and join us. Which we said, we'll do it Monday through Sunday. We don't care. If we're working that night, save it until tomorrow. Good time was had by all. We had a nurse, one nurse, Carol. Came over and I knew, let's see, I was over there and went in 59. Got back in 60. She had a, what the devil kind of, it was a white one. What the devil car was that? Sports model. I'll think of it. Anyhow, the prince who became king had one, but his was an older model. He tried to buy hers. That was funny. She would not sell it. Oh, he wanted that. Well, why didn't he order one? He became king. Mohammed, whatever. I think everybody over there was Mohammed somebody. And they had the two princesses who our legal officer paid them a certain amount of money at midnight on the street corner in downtown Rabat, because she got involved in an accident with a three-striper, Buck Sergeant we called him. They claim he was at fault. I don't know. All I know is the next day he was not in our outfit. He was on his way back to the States. They got rid of him in a hurry. And this guy, a lieutenant, bald-headed as a billiard ball from Kentucky, married the local Red Cross girl, paid her $2,300 under the street lamp on a corner in downtown Rabat from the U.S. government. I thought, oh, that's nice. I wish I had her car. All she had to do was go home. They opened the garage doors to that thing. They had 23 cars sitting in that garage. Fords, Chevys, anything you wanted. She never drove the same car 2 days in a row. That's where we used, same as Len Loss. They were living high on the hog, the people across the street starving to death. You know how they do in those countries. She was kind of cute. Wasn't her fault. She had all the access to all that stuff. That's the way she was raised. But that old boy that married the Red Cross girl, he was a kick in the fanny. He and the club officer, they were both second balloons. You know what I mean, second lieutenants. We called them balloons. Had a big argument who was going to get promoted first. One was a colored guy, and the other was the club officer. If I remember correctly, I think old Jim, the colored guy, who was light complected, got promoted over Mac. Mac was a club officer. He was dead last on the totem pole. But old Jim came in there happy as, oh my God, happy as hell. He made first lieutenant. He thought he was going to end his career as a second balloon, you know. So we had dice on the bar. You'd play horses, you'd roll dice for drinks, you'd do all that. He's going to beat everybody in the bar. Whew. All aces. All aces bought the bar. If you'd have seen the look on his face, he almost turned white. He took one look, and I'll give him credit. He said, well, there goes my raise. He lost it all in one roll. Good night. He was a good old boy. He was a funny guy. You've been in Morocco, haven't you? It's a nice place to go for a visit. Rabat, very nice. Casablanca, you can get lost in Casablanca. You can also get killed up there, from what I read. T-bird, that's what the nurse had. A white T-bird. That baby would roll. She and I, it was only a two-seater. But this guy that flew jets and I lived in the same hotel. She did eventually. We'd drive up to Casablanca or something like that. There was a nice joint halfway up to Casablanca, restaurant. Very, very nice French restaurant. Give you the best drinks in town. And I liked, what the devil was it? It was an after dinner drink. And they had a whole wall with all their top shelf stuff clear up to the ceiling, and they had a ladder that just went this way. And you drink a Drambuie is what I always wanted. And this old boy come out and get that ladder and get me way up on the top. He'd pick one up. He'd wipe the dust off it. He'd say, best in house, best in house. Man, they had a big fireplace going. We'd sit there and go. We'd keep Carol sober so she could drive us home. But old Glenn Schaefer, that idiot. He drove that car one day. We left Rabat. We're heading out the highway going to this restaurant halfway to Casablanca. When he decided he'd see how fast this baby'd go. Goes over, woo, straight stretch. He got it to about 120, and all you could hear was her screaming. My God, she was screaming bloody murder. She thought she was at her last ride when he finally slowed down. She gets out of that thing like... A good time was had by all. All you had to do was go back and go to work. As long as you could go to work, everything was okay. Worked in the control center. We had a colonel by the name of Fairbrother. He and I tangled, you might say. We didn't see eye to eye. So any dirty, rotten deal that had to be done, he'd say to this captain, give it to Jack. So that CETO air defense thing I was telling you about, they had a guy going to Ankara, Turkey, one to Tehran, and one to Karachi. So old Charlie Brighthop, who came from Nebraska, was telling me about it. And he says, and you're one of them. I said, I'll bet I can tell you where I'm going. He says, where? I said, Pakistan. How'd you guess? I said, it's further away than any of the rest, isn't it? I said, if that damn colonel sending me, that's where he's sending me. He said, you are 100% correct. He did not know I was there before. When I came back, we had to get debriefed in Ankara, Turkey by a 3-star general, English general. And I had been sent there with a Navy captain, equal to a colonel. Never saw him. I was with the Pakistani Air Force, their wing commanders and all those other group commanders and every other thing that they were called. They had pips and crowns and whatnot. This guy's name was Captain Byrd, B-Y-R-D, Navy captain. Where's Captain Byrd? Sorry, sir, I don't know. I observed the whole kit and caboodle. I was out checking their radar. I was out checking their 86s that they were flying at the time. That guy was nowhere. He showed up the last day that when I was heading back to Ankara, Turkey for a debriefing, and he says, you write up what happened, and I want to read it before you leave. I may want to make some corrections. I thought to myself, you dirty, rotten SOB, you're never going to see a thing I write. So I wrote it and got out of there and went to Ankara, Turkey. And got debriefed by the 3-star general. He comes in and he sees me, he says, I told you I wanted to see that report before you turned it in. I may want to make some adjustments. I looked at him and I says, Captain, from the day we left here, I have not seen you until right now. You have no idea what went on. How could you make any changes? I told you I wanted to see that. I said, unfortunately, you weren't here, and I turned it in. He knew damn well what I did. He wasn't going to see it in the first damn place. The general thanked me. When I get back to Morocco, a letter came down from General Dissaway up in Wiesbaden, thanking me for an outstanding job. Rah, 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 rah. Reflects great, good and whatnot on the U.S. Air Force. And me and my colonel didn't get along. So they put a note in my 201 file that says, noted. He never even congratulated, never said a bloody word. And this other colonel and I got along great. You know, he was lieutenant colonel. He made colonel later. I said, well, what did he say? He didn't say anything to me. Are you sure? I said, he and I don't get along. He went back to the States, and by God, I got sent to Duluth, Minnesota. I went down to Duluth Air Defense Sector, anyhow. Chicago Air Defense Sector, that's where he was. Ran right smack dab into him. Had 1 star then, you know, he was a colonel when I knew him. He looked at me and I looked at him and I said, well, how do you do, sir? How are you? Hello, Jack. Walked in the headquarters and here's a couple, 3 buddies I knew I was in Morocco with. Hi, Jack. Hi, Jack. Small world. Small world. Never saw the guy again. Never. Saw my old buddy, though, about the week before I retired. He had come over to Duluth from where he was down there. We went out to this nice little nightclub and had a couple. And said, sayonara. That's a wrong language. We're not in Japan, but you know what it means. Adios, mother.
Pardon me one moment. You could even cuss at the studio audience.
I wouldn't think of doing that. I would say it's been a pleasure doing work with you.
Thank you, sir.
Hope you enjoy it. I enjoyed it.
Thank you, sir. Likewise. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for being here. Appreciate it.
We appreciate your service.
That I do appreciate.
Some of us still understand
I know.
what it means.
I know. I understand where you're coming from there. And I have one request.
Yes, sir.
How much of an effort to make a copy of that?
I'll make you as many as you want.
I'd like to send one to my son.
You got it.
Okay. Because he's been after me for a long time to sit down and discuss where I've been and what I've done. And I think that covered quite a bit of it.
Beautiful. I'll make sure that happens.
Appreciate it.
Okay.
Okay,
Cut.
buddy.
Over and out.
Roger.
Fido.
Out. You know, not counting the co-pilot, he was good. I'm talking about the radio man, the engineer. We used to call each other by our first name. We'd go to Calcutta and RON, and we'd go down to the Great Eastern or the Grand Hotel and have ginger essence of lime and something else he used to put in it. It was a good a good hot weather drink. When the colonel come out one day and said, I'm flying with you today. Every now and then they pick somebody for a flight check to see how you're doing. Never will forget it. We had a crosswind of about 35 knots. The guy ahead of me started down the runway, and when he got airborne, he kept going like this. He was way over here, halfway down the runway. The old man looked at me and he says, I don't like that kind of takeoff. All I could say to myself is, whoopee. So I got out there, and I'm not lying. I firewalled that baby, and the minute it broke, I went like this, went right over the end of the runway. He just reached over and patted me on the back. Never a damn word. And my crew, who used to say, what the hell do you want now? Rah, 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 rah. Everything was, is everything all right, Lieutenant Bohr? How's everything there? Is this all right? Is that all right? When the colonel got out, I looked at him. I said, you idiots, what are you trying to do to me? We're just trying to make you look good. He says, the colonel don't like us calling you by your first name. I said, it wouldn't bother me. They said, yeah, it'd bother him. Which deep down, I don't think it really bothered them that much, because they wanted me, I appreciated that. They wanted me so much to have a good check ride. When we got back, we made a couple flights down to Burma, and ops officer got me about 10 o'clock that night and said, hey, Jack, come here. I went up and he says, you sure as hell must have gotten along good with the colonel today. I says, why? He said he told me that's the best damn ride he's had in this outfit. And he says, and don't let it swell your head, because you're still not getting promoted. And I didn't think I was ever going to get promoted. That colonel stood me up in Syracuse, New York, and he says, if this war lasts 20 years, you're going to have 20 years in grade as a second lieutenant. You'll never make first lieutenant. And I'm in the old shack in Burma. He comes up to me one afternoon about 4 o'clock. I had just come back from a flight. He comes up, he sits beside me. How about a drink? Yes, sir. I always like field grade booze. You know, field grades major and above. That's what they called them, field grade officers. As long as we're drinking out of his bottle, and it was his bottle. Then he looks over and he says, a crummy looking bar you have there. I said, there's no sense in shining it. So next thing I know, he's taking it off. And he puts on a silver one, which I couldn't see. And he said, there, that looks better. Good God Almighty. I made first lieutenant. When I come home in Missionary, Burma, he was out by the airplane, you know, shaking hands. He looked at me and he says, Jack, a lot of water's gone under the bridge since I first met you. I said, yes, sir. He says, I called you Jack before I ever knew the names of my flight leaders. I said, yes, sir, I agree to that. And I said, I actually used to think it was your fault. He said, what made you think that? I said, you called me into your office at 7 o'clock every morning. The CQ'd say, the colonel wants to see you. That was true. Every day. It seemed like every day, you know. But he said, I want you to know, he said, I'm going to China, to Chongqing. So that's 3 or 4 months. He said, I don't really know how long. That's what they told me. He said, would you like to go with me or would you like to go home? I said, sir, you gave me a choice there. The airplane's right behind you. I think I'm going home. Damn glad you were in my outfit. I said, I waited a long time to hear that. I think the old boy meant it. He knew where I was all the time. The guys he counted on always didn't do what they wanted. And he'd say, where's Bohr flying? That's all he ever does is fly. Led the group in flying time, most of the time.